I never believed that paintings could hide secrets, until I found myself alone in that cursed castle. I remember the first moment I saw it. A dimly lit corridor leading to a chamber thick with dust and silence. The day I arrived, twilight was settling, and the castle's ancient stones seemed to shiver with each gust of wind rolling in off the nearby hills. My footsteps echoed along the floor as if the corridor were an endless tunnel of hollowed stone. I'd been summoned here, after all, to restore the royal family's collection, nothing more than a modest job for a traveling painter and conservator. Or so I thought. But there was something about that place, something uneasy in the air, like a whisper you couldn't quite catch. As I set down my case of brushes and pigments, I felt the walls close in, as if my presence disrupted the careful balance of secrets kept hidden. The castle was supposed to be empty except for a handful of staff members, yet I could not shake the feeling of being watched. When I passed beneath the grand portrait of the late King Reynard III, I was certain the painted eyes followed me. My skin prickled with unease. That night the corridors felt colder than usual. I had taken up a temporary lodging in a small guest room on the 3rd floor. Outside, the wind howled like a wounded creature. I rose from my bed and lit a small lantern. On my first day, I had only begun the preliminary examinations of the paintings I was hired to restore. Most were dusty family portraits or depictions of old battles, typical fare. But the curator who hired me, a stern fellow named Thorn, had pulled me aside and whispered that there was one painting in particular he wanted me to handle with discretion. At the time, I didn't think much of it. These old families often guarded their legacy ferociously, and sometimes a single painting could contain embarrassing details they wanted to keep under wraps. As I ventured from my room, lantern in hand, I listened for footsteps, for the hushed voice of another human being, but I found only silence. When I reached the gallery hall, the moonlight filtered through leaded windows, lending the space a pale bluish glow. Dust motes drifted in the air like tiny ghosts. The artworks, each covered with a protective veil of cloth, stood against the wall, silent witnesses to my late-night curiosity. I approached one painting I had not examined closely. It rested on an easel at the far end of the corridor, half obscured by a tattered curtain. For some reason, I felt drawn to it. The cloth fluttered slightly in a draught, revealing a hint of dark oil beneath. I was certain it had not been there when I first arrived. Carefully, I pulled the covering aside. Beneath it lay an image of a room I did not recognize, a lavish chamber with golden drapes and an ornate throne. But the centerpiece was unsettling. In that chamber, a figure cloaked in red stooped over a lifeless body sprawled on a cold marble floor. Blood, painted in deep burgundy, almost black under the moonlight, pooled at the victim's head. The victim wore royal garb. I squinted, leaning in, careful not to let my lantern's flame scorch the canvas. The detail was exquisite, eerily so. The victim's eyes were half-lidded, his crown rolled away, and in the background stood a window of stained glass. I could almost swear I saw moonlight painted within that painted window, so lifelike it gave me chills. A lump formed in my throat. The brushwork, the style. Something about it felt old, very old, older than the other paintings. Yet I had never seen or heard mention of this particular piece. Why was it covered? Why had Thorn warned me of a special painting requiring discretion? I leaned closer, trying to identify the artist's signature or a date, but the lower corner had been crudely scratched as if someone tried to remove any clue of its origin. And then I saw it. Or rather, I felt it. The eyes of the cloaked figure. Even though their face was mostly hidden, the shape of the eyes was disturbingly familiar. They seemed to gleam in the darkness as if alive. My lantern's flame flickered, and in that moment, I felt a presence behind me. I spun around, heart pounding, but no one was there. Only the silence of the corridor and the rows of covered paintings bore witness to my trembling. I decided to return to my room, but as I drew the cloth back over the painting, I noticed something else, a tiny smear of fresh paint on my fingertips. Impossible. These paintings were centuries old, their paint long dried and cracked. Yet here it was, wet to the touch, as if someone had just finished painting moments before I arrived. I wiped the paint away on my handkerchief, unsettled, and hurried back. In my room, I tried to calm myself. This was ridiculous. I was hired to restore old works, not to play detective. Still, my mind would not let it go. Who was the victim in that painting? Was it depicting the murder of a king or a nobleman? The pose, the clothing. Could it be one of the former monarchs? Perhaps King Reynard the Fair, who died under suspicious circumstances long ago, if the old rumors were true. But why hide it now? Why was it placed in my path? I tried to sleep, but the wind outside only grew more restless, rattling my window. After hours of tossing and turning, I slipped back into the hall. This time, I carried no light. I moved quietly, barefoot, so as not to alert anyone who might be lurking. I could barely see in the dark, but I remembered where the painting stood. Except now, when I reached the end of the corridor, there was nothing there but an empty easel. The painting was gone. My heart hammered. Had I imagined it? I reached out blindly, feeling the wooden frame of the easel. Yes, it was there, but bare. I strained my eyes, searching the darkness. And then, as if to mock me, I heard a whisper. It was just one word, too faint to make out, but distinctly human. I felt hot breath on the back of my neck and spun around again. Nothing. Only the faint outline of arches and door frames. I had found a painting that should never have been seen. I was certain of that now. Something was going on in this castle that defied logic and reason. And if I stayed, if I continued my work, I would have to uncover what lay beneath centuries of dust and silence. As I stepped backward toward my room, something caught my eye. A smear of burgundy paint on the floor where the painting once stood. It led toward a door I had not noticed before. A low, wooden door half hidden by a curtain. I swallowed hard. If I had known what was behind that door, I would never have stepped inside. When morning finally came, I found myself weary and restless, yet determined to pursue the secret that had so rudely revealed itself the night before. After dressing and splashing cold water on my face, I went back into the gallery corridors. The castle by daylight felt different. The heavy hush of night was replaced by distant clattering. Somewhere, a kitchen staff member was likely preparing breakfast. Sunlight spilled through the high windows, illuminating dust motes that danced lazily in the warm rays. It was almost peaceful, but I knew better now. The castle's calm facade concealed its treacherous heart. I made my way downstairs, following the winding corridors until I reached the main foyer. There I found Thorn, the curator who had hired me. He was standing near the entrance, conversing quietly with the groundskeeper, a wizened old man named Derwin. At my approach, Thorn greeted me with a curt nod, his sharp blue eyes narrowing slightly, as if he could sense my unrest. "Sleep well, Edmund?" he asked in a voice that held no genuine warmth. He wore a tidy waistcoat and carried a ledger under one arm. I forced a thin smile. Well enough, though this place is rather drafty at night. Derwin, the groundskeeper, refused to meet my eyes. He twisted his cap in his rough hands, looking at the floor. I tried to engage him. Perhaps he had seen something. "Good morning, sir. The gardens must be beautiful this time of year, yes?" I ventured. He merely grunted, still not looking up. Thorn cleared his throat. "If you're ready, Edmund, I can show you to the storeroom where the older pieces are kept. We have a few that need restoration before the royal family's next visit." As we walked, I decided to take a risk. "I found a curious painting last night," I said, feigning casual interest. "One depicting a rather grim scene, someone in royal attire being attacked. I wonder if you know of it?" Thorn stiffened, paused mid-step. "The castle houses many old works, some of which are in dire need of archiving," he said carefully. "I urge you not to wander alone at night. There are pieces that were never meant to be displayed." He gave me a tight-lipped smile. "Focus on the pieces I assign to you, Edmund, and you'll be rewarded generously." It was not a denial, nor an explanation. His reaction told me enough. He knew exactly which painting I spoke of, and he wanted me to forget it. I followed him in silence as we descended stone steps to a lower level. My stomach twisted as we passed that corridor from the previous night. The strange low door I had seen in the darkness now appeared to be locked, its surface thick with cobwebs. In the storeroom, I was introduced to a handful of canvases. Boring, unremarkable works for the most part, scenes of pastoral life, portraits of lesser nobles. None of them resembled the disturbing painting I'd discovered. After laying out my tools, I attempted to focus on my restoration tasks, but my mind kept drifting back to that vanished painting. Why had it been placed there? Why had someone taken it away again so quickly? And what was behind that low door? That afternoon, as I scraped old varnish from a portrait, I caught a glimpse of Derwin lurking at the edge of the open storeroom door. He seemed to be watching me. When our eyes met, he hurried away, muttering something under his breath. I wiped my brush clean and followed him, curious. He walked down a narrow corridor, then outside into the overgrown courtyard. The day was bright, and the scent of damp moss and wildflowers drifted in the air. Yet the castle's looming presence shaded half the courtyard, casting long, finger-like shadows across the stones. "Derwin," I called softly, not wanting to startle him. He stood by a cracked statue of a weeping angel. "I know you've worked here a long time. Do you know anything about a hidden painting? One that shows a murder?" The word felt heavy on my tongue. He turned slowly, his wrinkled face twisting with discomfort. "You don't belong here," he said in a voice that was nearly a whisper. "That painting is older than the current line of kings. It's cursed, I tell you. Best you focus on your work and leave before the next moon wanes." Cursed. Another unhelpful hint. But Derwin's fear was genuine. He'd said it was older than the current line of kings. Did it depict the murder of a predecessor? Perhaps an ancestor who was usurped? I pressed him further. Who painted it? Who was the victim? But he only shook his head, eyes darting toward the castle walls as if he feared they were listening. He turned and hurried away, leaving me alone with more questions than answers. Over the next hours, I made a show of diligence, restoring the paintings Thorn had assigned, but my heart wasn't in it. I felt eyes on me constantly, and each time I glanced at the door, I half expected to see someone standing there. Once I thought I heard quiet footsteps outside, but when I checked, the corridor was empty. The silence was oppressive, as if the castle itself were holding its breath. Later that evening, when I returned to my room, I found a folded note slipped under my door. The parchment was thin and smelled faintly of smoke. The message, written in a trembling hand, read, "If you know what's good for you, forget the painting. It shows what must never be spoken. The king's bloodline depends on silence." My heart leapt. So I had stumbled onto a royal secret, something that could threaten the current monarchy. The painting must depict a regicide, or some terrible betrayal that laid the foundation for the ruling line's power. No wonder it was hidden. No wonder Thorn had been so tense. But who left me this note? Was it a warning or a threat? That night, I bolted my door. I tried to sleep, but my mind churned with possibilities. Eventually, I pulled on my coat and decided to try one more thing. I would return to that corridor, to the low wooden door. I had to know what lay behind it. I crept quietly through the castle's halls, guided by moonlight and memory. The corridors seemed longer at night, as if stretching to trap me inside an endless labyrinth. At last, I reached the spot where I had seen the door. There it was, half hidden behind a heavy tapestry. As I approached, I noticed something strange. The door was slightly ajar. A musty smell wafted out. I held my breath and slipped inside. The chamber beyond was small and cramped, illuminated only by a faint glow from a slit high in the wall. Inside, propped against the stone, was the very painting I'd discovered, no longer on an easel, but leaned precariously on a crate. Its surface shimmered faintly, as if the paint were still drying. I inched closer. This time, I examined every detail. Yes, the slain figure wore a crown similar to old sketches I'd once seen of a long-dead king, the cloaked attacker. I squinted. Something about that stance. I realized with horror that the hand gripping the dagger bore a unique ring, one I'd seen depicted in other official portraits. That ring belonged to the founder of the current royal line. The truth was clear now. This painting depicted not some random murder, but the very moment the old monarchy fell and the new one seized power through bloodshed. My body trembled with the weight of it. This revelation could topple the current regime, or worse, it could bring their wrath upon me. Footsteps echoed in the corridor outside. I froze, heart pounding. I extinguished my small lantern. The door creaked open wider, and I held my breath, hiding behind the crate. If I'd known what was behind that door, I would never have stepped inside. And now, I couldn't escape. The footsteps paused just outside, and I felt my heart threaten to burst from my chest. In the darkness, I clutched the edge of the crate, praying they would turn away. But the door swung inward another inch, flooding the cramped chamber with a thin blade of moonlight. I shrank back, pressing myself flat against the cold stone wall. I dared not breathe. Whoever stood there remained silent, listening. I imagined their eyes adjusting to the darkness, scanning for movement. After a tense moment, the door closed again, and their footsteps retreated down the corridor. I waited a long time before daring to move. When I finally slipped out, I took note that the tapestry hung oddly, as if someone had been watching from behind it. I hurried back to my room feeling exposed, like a rabbit that had narrowly escaped a hawk's talons. That night, sleep was impossible. I tossed in bed, wrestling with what I had learned. The painting was proof of a centuries-old crime, one that established the current royal line in treachery. If revealed, it could cause chaos. Yet I knew I was not the only one aware of its existence. Thorne, Derwin, and whoever placed that note under my door, they all knew something. The curator's warning echoed in my head. Focus on the assigned works and forget what I had seen. But could I live with that? To restore the painted lies of a family that rose to power on murder, knowing the truth and choosing to remain silent? I tried to rationalize. I was just a painter, a restorer. I had been hired to do a job, not to moralize. But the knowledge wouldn't leave me. The image of that murdered king was burned into my mind. And what about the strange, fresh paint I had felt? How could that painting still be wet after centuries? Was someone touching it up each generation, ensuring it remained hidden but intact, as if it had a life of its own? The next morning, I found Thorne waiting for me in the gallery. He had a new assignment, a grand portrait of the current king's ancestors that hung in the main hall. I set about my work with feigned diligence. As I carefully removed the old varnish, I couldn't help but think. These official portraits always show nobility in their best light, erasing any stain of sin. Would I be complicit in their cover-up? I decided to seek answers where I could, through the servants. They often knew more than their masters gave them credit for. While cleaning my brushes at a small basin in the courtyard, I overheard two maids whispering about strange happenings. I approached them gently, asking if they'd ever heard rumors of a forbidden painting. They exchanged nervous glances before one spoke. They say it shows the true origin of the crown, that it's locked away so no one can ever learn how the first king seized the throne. Why keep it at all? I asked. The other maid answered, voice trembling. because destroying it is said to bring a curse down upon the royal line. So they hide it and keep it secret. It is the source of their guilt, but also their power. Rumor says the painting itself changes over time, as if the souls of those depicted never rest. The weight of these words left me speechless. A painting that cannot be destroyed, that reveals a centuries-old sin, that must remain hidden. This was no ordinary artwork. I thanked the maids and retreated. That afternoon as I worked, I thought I saw movement out of the corner of my eye. Each time I looked directly, there was no one. But I sensed a presence, a watcher in the shadows. My nerves were frayed, and my hand trembled as I applied new varnish. Eventually, I set my brushes down and pretended to stretch my legs. Passing through a side corridor, I listened carefully. Sure enough, I heard the faint scuff of a shoe on stone. Someone was following me. I cornered them by taking a sudden turn. To my surprise, it was Derwin again. He shrank back as I confronted him. "Why are you following me?" I demanded. He shook his head vigorously. "Shh, not so loud. They'll hear." His eyes darted about. "I followed you because I feared you'd do something foolish. Do not try to reveal that painting's secret. They'll kill you if you speak openly." He was panting now, voice barely audible. I've seen it happen before. A restorer decades ago learned the truth and tried to leave with it. They found him at the bottom of the ravine. Terror settled in my belly. "What do you want from me?" I asked. He swallowed hard, gripping his cap. "Nothing. Don't meddle. If you value your life, pretend you never saw it." I walked away without answering, my head spinning. Letting it go might preserve my life, but at what cost to my conscience? The castle was complicit in murder, and this lie had lived on through the centuries. That evening, as I paced my room, I heard something outside my door. Quiet footsteps again. I flung the door open, determined to catch my stalker. No one was there, just the empty corridor lit by a single torch. But on the floor, I found a scrap of parchment. It bore a crudely sketched image, the painting's scene, murder and crown. Below it, a line. "The truth will set you free, or bury you." Who was leaving these messages? Someone encouraging me to uncover the truth, or trapping me? I knew I had to return to the hidden chamber and examine the painting more thoroughly. This time, I would search for any hidden clues, signatures, symbols, anything that could tell me who painted it and why it persisted. I waited until late night again, when the castle slept. I carried no lantern this time, relying on moonlight and my memory. I slipped through the corridors like a shadow. The castle felt alive, its stones pulsing with silent knowledge. When I reached the low door, it was locked. I gently felt around the frame and discovered a loose stone under which a simple iron key lay hidden. My heart hammered. This was no accident. Someone wanted me inside. I opened the door and entered the cramped chamber. The painting was there as I left it, propped against the crate. But now someone had lit a small candle in a niche, illuminating the canvas in flickering light. I knelt before the painting and brought my face close. The brushwork was masterful, beyond ordinary skill. Each detail looked alive. I ran my fingers lightly along the edges, feeling the paint texture. Then, near the lower right corner, I found something. A tiny inscription etched into the still tacky paint. It read, "By this blood, kings are made." As I leaned back, a wave of dizziness struck me. It was as if the scene in the painting was moving. I saw the cloaked figure raise their dagger, the victim gasp a final breath. I blinked, and it was still just paint. But the sensation lingered. I realized I was trembling. I whispered to myself, "What am I doing?" In that moment, I heard a scraping sound. The door behind me was closing. I rushed to it, but it slammed shut. I tried the handle, locked. I was trapped inside with the painting. Panic surged, and I pounded on the door, calling out for help. No response. I was alone with this cursed image, and each second I spent here felt like I was sinking deeper into a pit of danger. I slumped against the wall, breath ragged. If they wanted me trapped, why give me the key in the first place? A cruel game? My eyes drifted to the painting again. If I revealed this secret, I would be hunted. If I stayed silent, I'd be complicit in the monarchy's original sin. Caught between fear and conscience, I faced a choice. Pretend ignorance and survive, or risk everything to bring the truth to light. Outside, I heard footsteps again, faint and distant. I had to make a decision before morning. The candlelight danced on the painting's surface, and I realized the moral dilemma before me: truth or safety. Could I live knowing I protected a lie that cost a king his life and countless generations their honest history? As I struggled with these thoughts, I noticed something new about the painting's background, a detail I hadn't recognized before. A small, faint reflection in the stained glass window depicted another figure watching the murder. A silent witness painted into the scene. Who was that witness? I leaned in for a closer look. The candle flickered, and I squinted at the tiny reflection painted within the stained glass. It was faint, almost impossible to discern, but after minutes of careful study, I realized it was a face I knew. Although the features were stylized and centuries old, it bore an uncanny resemblance to Thorn. The curator who hired me, his sharp nose, high cheekbones, the proud tilt of his head, were captured in that faint reflection. How could that be possible? Thorn was a modern man, living in the present, not some ancient conspirator from generations ago. Unless, the painting wasn't just a painting, it was something else, something timeless. A gateway, as the maid's rumor suggested, connecting past and present. Could Thorn be a descendant so eerily similar to his ancestor that the painting's reflection seemed to mock the lineage? Or was there something more supernatural at play? I remembered the maid's words about the painting changing over time, the wet paint, the shifting details. Maybe the painting served as a vessel for a terrible secret, a living record that adapted as generations passed. If Thorn's ancestor was present at the murder that established the monarchy, perhaps Thorn himself was now bound to this legacy, cursed to guard it forever. I paced the small chamber, feeling the chill of the stones seep into my bones. I tried the door again, still locked. "Let me out," I hissed into the silence. Nothing. The candle sputtered, as if to remind me time was running short. If I stayed too long, I might never leave this room alive. Desperation fueled me. I returned to the painting and tried something bold. I pried lightly at the canvas edge. To my surprise, the canvas was not fully secured to the frame. Inside, where the back should have been solid, I discovered a hidden compartment. My heart leapt. Reaching in, I pulled out a rolled parchment. Unfurling it, I revealed old handwriting in a language that looked archaic. I made out a few words: rightful king, treason, eternal remembrance. This was some kind of confession or record. I struggled through the archaic script, piecing together fragments. It spoke of how the true king was murdered by a trusted advisor who then claimed the throne. The painting was commissioned in secret by a remorseful servant who witnessed it all. Over the centuries, the painting had been hidden, altered, and preserved by those who knew its power. It warned that anyone who destroyed the painting would bring doom upon their lineage, an old superstition that kept it safe. And in the margins, I saw a family tree drawn in faint ink, branching down through the ages. At the end of that line was a name resembling Thorn's family name. Suddenly, the key scratched in the door's lock. I hurriedly replaced the parchment and pressed the canvas back. The door swung open, and Thorn stood there, holding a lantern. His face was a mask of controlled anger. Behind him hovered Derwin, looking pale and frightened. Thorn stepped inside, closing the door behind him. "You should have listened to me, Edmund," he said quietly. "We hired you for restoration, not for meddling in matters that don't concern you." My throat was dry. "You locked me in here. You left that key so I'd enter and trap myself. Why?" My voice sounded steadier than I felt. Thorn's jaw tightened. "I needed to know if you would respect the boundaries set for you. You have not. Now we must decide what to do with you." Derwin cleared his throat, his voice trembling. "Please, sir, he's just a painter. He didn't know." Thorn silenced him with a glare. "He knows too much now." I considered my options. If I confronted Thorn directly with the parchment, he might kill me on the spot. I needed leverage. "This painting," I said, "has survived countless generations. Doesn't that strike you as odd, Thorn? Why keep it?" His eyes flashed. "We keep it hidden because it must never see the light of day. The kingdom rests on the legitimacy of the current line. If the truth were known, that a traitor founded our dynasty, the resulting chaos would be unimaginable." I dared to push further. "You speak as if you carry the same burden as your ancestors. Are you related?" He laughed, but it was hollow. "I am the latest in a long line of guardians. We bear the secret and ensure it remains buried. That is all you need to know." I took a step forward, my voice low but resolute. "You're trapped as much as I am. This painting haunts you, forces you to live a lie." He lunged forward and gripped my collar, shoving me against the wall. His breath smelled of stale wine. "And what would you do, Edmund? Expose this and destroy the kingdom's peace? Watch as bloodlines tear themselves apart?" His knuckles whitened. "Or would you walk away, pretend you saw nothing, and live?" I could barely breathe. Derwin hovered behind him, wringing his hands. I managed to choke out words. "I'm not your enemy, but I can't unsee what I've seen. Let me go." "I'll say nothing." His eyes searched mine for deceit. "You think I'm a fool?" I fought for calm. "No, but I know what I saw here scares you. It scares me too. You fear the truth more than anything, but you also respect it. You didn't kill me immediately. You're hesitating." He released me, pacing between me and the painting. "If I let you go, I have no guarantee." I rubbed my sore neck, trying to breathe normally. "I'm no revolutionary. I'm a painter. This secret, it's too big for me. Let me finish my assigned work, get paid, and leave. You'll never see me again." Thorn glanced at Derwin, who gave a pleading look. He seemed caught between his duty to protect the secret and his reluctance to commit murder. After a tense silence, he said, "We'll keep you under watch. One false step, and your life is forfeit. Understood?" I nodded, feigning acquiescence. Inside, I was seething. I couldn't just leave this secret buried. The truth gnawed at me. But for now, I played along. "Understood." Thorn guided me out of the chamber and locked the door behind us. As we walked away, I noticed the key returned to its hiding place. Derwin lingered, shame etched on his face. Back in my room, I tried to steady my racing heart. I had learned the truth. The monarchy was founded on treachery. The painting was a cursed artifact ensuring that sin was never forgotten. Thorn was its guardian, trapped in a role passed down through generations, and I was now a captive of their secret, forced to pretend ignorance. But I couldn't let it rest. I'd come too far. My conscience wouldn't allow me to restore their anodyne portraits while the real story lay hidden. If I said nothing, I was complicit in their crime. If I spoke out, I'd likely be killed. Yet perhaps I could find a way to reveal it subtly, or escape the castle with evidence. That night, I plotted. I packed my things in case an opportunity arose. I had seen the parchment and knew its hiding spot. If I could get it out, show it to the right person, maybe a scholar or a rival noble, it could spark a revelation. But I had to be careful. Thorn was watching me closely. As I lay on my bed, staring at the ceiling's ancient beams, I recalled the painting's eerie effect. I remembered how I thought I'd seen it move, how the paint felt fresh. There was something more at play, something almost supernatural. Could the painting's curse be real? Would exposing the truth bring ruin not just to the monarchy but also to me? I heard footsteps outside my door again. This time I recognized the pattern. Slow, deliberate. Thorne's men were guarding me. My time was short. If I waited too long, they might decide to end me anyway. I rose, heart pounding, and whispered to myself, I have to do something, soon. The weight of my moral dilemma pressed down. My next move would define my fate. If only I could prove that I wasn't the only one who wanted this secret exposed. Somewhere in this cursed castle, I sensed there was another ally. Someone who had left those messages and notes. If I found them, maybe we could work together. I pressed my ear to the door and listened. Silence, except for the distant moan of wind through the battlements. I had until dawn perhaps to find a solution. The painting's truth burned in my mind. I had to act. I spent the next day locked in a dance of pretense. I worked diligently on the restorations Thorne had assigned, carefully scraping old varnish and applying delicate layers of new paint, all under the watchful eye of a guard posted at the gallery door. My captors seemed determined to keep me busy, as though restoring the kingdom's pristine image might lure me into complacency. But my thoughts were anywhere but complacent. With each brushstroke, I considered my options. I couldn't leave through the main gate without passing under the scrutiny of the guards. There might be a secret exit. Old castles often had them, but I hadn't found one yet. I also wondered if Derwin might help me. He was clearly terrified, but he might prefer seeing the truth set free rather than continue serving a lie. As the afternoon light angled through the high windows, I noticed a figure lurking in the courtyard. Slipping out on a pretense of fetching fresh water, I identified them as the maid who had whispered rumors before. I approached and whispered, "Please, I need your help. The truth must be known." She recoiled, eyes wide with fear. "You'd bring ruin to us all," she hissed. "Don't speak of it. They'll kill you, and anyone who helps." "Wait," I pleaded. "Someone left me notes, warnings. Was it you?" She shook her head, genuinely terrified. "No, I know nothing. Please leave me be." She fled, leaving me alone in the courtyard. My frustration mounted. Back in the corridor, I passed Derwin carrying a bundle of firewood. He looked at me, then away. I seized the moment. "Derwin," I whispered, "I know you don't agree with what's happening here. Help me. Show me a way out, or a way to reveal the truth without getting us both killed." He glanced around, fearful. If I do that, they'll hang me for treason. But if we do nothing, we remain servants to a lie, I said softly. "You know the truth weighs on your heart." He hesitated, his eyes glistening with conflicted emotion. Finally, he whispered, "Meet me after midnight in the old chapel. It's off the western wing, past the scullery. I'll show you something." Without waiting for my reply, he hurried off. My chest tightened with hope and fear. Perhaps Derwin would lead me to an escape route or even a place to hide the evidence. I spent the rest of the day under close watch, finishing the assigned restorations. I pretended obedience, nodding politely to the guards, making small talk about the weather. Inside, I was a storm of nerves. Late that night, when the halls were quiet, I slipped out of my room. The guards stationed there had dozed off. I crept along corridors lit only by moonlight. The castle groaned with ancient age, its wooden beams and stone walls settling into uneasy sleep. I found the scullery and moved beyond it, into an older, dustier wing. At the end of a corridor, a half-rotten door stood slightly ajar, a swirl of cobwebs clinging to its frame. Inside was the old chapel, abandoned and dim. Moonlight fell through a broken window onto a toppled altar. Derwin stood there, holding a single candle. He looked older than ever, the lines of worry etched deeply on his face. "I can't bear this any longer," he whispered, voice trembling. "Each generation I've served here, keeping quiet. But when I saw your courage..." His words trailed off as if he couldn't believe he was speaking them. I stepped closer. "You can help me, Derwin. Together we can free ourselves from this burden." He shook his head sadly. "I can't help you escape. The castle is sealed at night, and the guards are loyal to Thorn. But there's something here you must see." He moved behind the altar and pushed aside a loose stone. Inside was a small wooden box. He opened it, revealing old letters and a locket. "These letters," he said, "were written by my ancestors, who served under the very family that committed the murder. They chronicle the secret, how the painting was hidden, how the lie was perpetuated. Take them, show them to the world, and perhaps the truth will finally be told." I reached out, touched the letters gently. "If I do this, won't they come after you?" He looked away. "I'm old, Edmund. I've lived in fear too long. Let them do what they will. My conscience will be clear." My throat tightened with gratitude. "Thank you." Just then, footsteps echoed down the corridor. Derwin's eyes widened. "Hide!" he hissed. I pressed myself against a pillar as a guard entered, sword drawn. He spotted Derwin standing by the altar. "What are you doing here, old man?" the guard demanded, scanning the darkness. "I thought I heard voices." Derwin forced a chuckle. "Just an old fool come to pray for forgiveness. Nothing more." The guard stepped forward, suspicious. I held my breath. If he found me, it was over. Derwin risked a glance at me, then shook his head. He drew the guard's attention by limping forward, making noise, guiding him away from my hiding place. The guard snorted. "Forgiveness, eh? Nothing will save you if I find you lying." He turned to leave. "Get back to your quarters, old man, and stay there." After the guard's footsteps receded, I emerged. Derwin handed me the letters, wrapping them in a scrap of cloth. "You must go now. Return to your room. Tomorrow, find a way out with these. I can do nothing more." I clutched his hand. "I won't forget what you've done." As I crept back through the castle, I weighed the risks. Even if I escaped with these letters, where would I go? How would I reveal this truth safely? If I made the truth public, the monarchy might retaliate, but perhaps other nobles would rally behind the rightful history, or at least the people would know. The thought both thrilled and terrified me. Back in my room, I hid the letters beneath a loose floorboard. I lay awake, formulating a plan. At dawn, I'd act as if nothing had changed. I would finish my restorations and then feign illness or ask to leave earlier than planned. Maybe I could slip past the guards in the hustle of day. Once outside, I'd head straight to the scholars in the nearby town, who might decode the archaic parchment and verify the authenticity of the letters. Then, the secret would be out of my hands, out of the castle's grasp. But dawn brought new tensions. Thorn summoned me unexpectedly to the main hall. I went, heart pounding, wondering if he'd discovered my meeting with Derwin. When I arrived, I found him with 2 guards at his side. He wore a grim expression. "I've decided to pay you for your work and send you away, Edmund," he said, offering a tight-lipped smile that didn't reach his eyes. "You have done well, and we have no further need of your services." My heart leapt. This was exactly what I wanted, and yet it felt too easy. "Thank you," I replied, feigning gratitude. "I'll pack my tools and be gone by midday." He nodded. "And remember, you saw nothing unusual here. If we hear otherwise, rest assured, we know how to find you." I bowed my head, swallowing hard. "I understand." As I left, I felt the guards' eyes burning into my back. They might let me go, but they'd watch me. If I tried to leave with incriminating documents, they'd search me. I needed a distraction, something to draw attention away from me long enough to slip the letters out. That afternoon, I pretended to load my cases near a side gate. I hid the letters under my shirt, bound tight with cloth. Nervous sweat trickled down my neck. A guard approached, eyeing my belongings. "What's that bulge under your vest?" he demanded. My heart skipped a beat. I needed a lie, fast. Before I could speak, a scream echoed from inside the castle, a maid's shriek. Both of us turned our heads. Another cry followed. The guard cursed and ran inside. Fate had given me a precious moment. I seized it. I slipped through the gate, onto the winding path that led away from the castle. My footsteps were soft in the mossy soil as I hurried under the shadow of high trees. Behind me, distant shouts rang out. Had they found the painting missing? Or discovered Derwin's involvement? I didn't look back. With the letters pressed to my chest, I ran. I stumbled through the forest surrounding the castle grounds, branches snatching at my clothes, roots tripping my feet. Fear spurred me onward. I half expected guards to appear behind every tree, arrows notched, ready to silence me forever. But as minutes passed, I heard only my own ragged breathing and the rustle of leaves. When I reached a small clearing, I paused to catch my breath. The castle's spires rose behind me, dark against the sky. I had escaped, but I wasn't safe yet. I followed the narrow road until I reached a small village by dusk. There, I found a modest inn and took a room under a false name. Within the privacy of that cramped space, I unwrapped the letters and read them more thoroughly, relying on the dim candlelight. The letters were a confession passed down by a line of servants who had guarded the painting at the orders of their masters. They knew the truth and hated it, yet fear had kept them silent. The details were chilling. How the murder of the rightful king had been orchestrated, how the new ruler seized the throne and began a dynasty on a bedrock of blood. Names, dates, places, all were laid bare. The next morning, I visited a known historian in the village, a scholar I'd met briefly in my travels. I presented the letters, careful not to reveal my name or where I obtained them. The scholar's eyes widened at the old script and authentic seals. He agreed to copy and disseminate the content secretly, ensuring the truth would spread quietly at first, and then, inevitably, publicly. Before I left, I asked him, "Do you believe people will care? This happened centuries ago." The scholar studied me. "If it's true, it will shake the foundations of the current monarchy. Legitimacy, after all, is the cornerstone of power. People will ask questions. They will want justice, or at least honesty about their past." I departed with a heavy heart, unsure if I had done the right thing. The monarchy might respond violently, perhaps hunting down those who dared repeat the secret. But at least the truth was no longer locked away in that cursed castle. It would live or die on its own merits. I wandered the countryside for days, restless. Would they send assassins? Would Thorn appear in the night to reclaim the letters? But as days turned to weeks, no one came. I heard rumors in taverns of ancient scandals and forged documents whispered among travelers. Some scoffed at the stories, others seemed intrigued. The truth, once released, could not be easily contained. And what of the painting itself? I learned through travelers that the castle had closed its doors for a time, refusing visitors. Rumor had it that several servants, including an old groundskeeper, had been dismissed under mysterious circumstances. Derwin, I thought, had likely paid for his kindness. The notion pained me. He had risked everything to help me. I could only hope he found a measure of peace. One night, as I sat alone in a quiet inn, I fingered a small token I had kept, a scrap of fabric I'd found in the chapel that night, a reminder of Derwin's courage. I pictured the painting's gruesome scene and felt that haunting gaze again. Had I done the right thing by revealing the truth? I had risked lives, including my own, but I couldn't have carried that secret in silence. It would have poisoned my soul. Gradually, news reached me in bits and pieces. A distant kingdom had begun an inquiry into its own royal lineage. A bishop questioned the sanctity of a crown passed down through murder. Quietly, people demanded records from old archives. The story spread like ripples in a pond. I had lit a fuse on an old powder keg. Yet I remained safe. I changed my name, took small jobs painting portraits in neighboring towns. I worked in anonymity. And as I painted each new face, merchants, farmers, children, I thought about the lies and truths we carry. Paint could smooth over scars or bring them into focus. By revealing the secret painting's story, I had chosen honesty over comfort. It felt right, even if I could never return to my old life. Months later, while working in a small coastal village, I received a letter delivered by a traveler who claimed no knowledge of its sender. It bore no seal. Inside was a single line written in careful script. "The burden is lifted. I found peace." I stared at it for a long time, tears gathering in my eyes. Derwin had survived, or someone who cared for him had written these words. It meant I was not alone in my belief that truth, once freed, could bring release, even if at a great cost. Life went on. The monarchy didn't crumble overnight, but I heard talk that negotiations were underway to address old grievances. Certain advisors were dismissed, and new reforms were whispered about. The painting itself, I imagine, remained hidden, or perhaps even destroyed at last. With the truth spread, its curse might have broken. After all, what power does a secret hold when it's no longer secret? As I contemplated my journey, I realized I had changed. I was no longer the timid painter who arrived at that castle, hoping to earn a wage. I had dared to stand against centuries of silence. My brush had revealed not only color and form, but history and conscience. Looking up from my easel at the end of a long day's work, I reflected on the cost of truth. Knowledge can be a heavy burden, yet doing nothing, accepting the lie, would have been heavier still. I had made my choice and would stand by it. If you, dear listener, have made it this far, I invite you to consider the same questions that haunted me in those dark castle halls. Would you have risked your life to expose the truth? Would you have kept silent to preserve safety and order? Let me know what you think in the comments below. And if you found this story engaging, if it stirred something within you, please subscribe to the channel for more stories like this. Your support helps keep these tales alive and encourages the pursuit of truth, no matter how deeply it's buried. So now, as I finish this tale, I ask, what would you have done in my place? Let me know in the comments, and don't forget to subscribe for more mysteries and stories that dare to question the past.